London, 1845. The brisk autumn air carried whispers through Mayfair's elegantly appointed squares, whispers that slithered beneath doorways and danced through drawing rooms like unwelcome ghosts. Miss Amelia Kensington stood perfectly still as her lady's maid fastened the final button on her pale blue morning dress, her face a careful mask of composure while her heart hammered within her chest. Today marked 1 week since her fiancé, Mr. Edmund Lockwood, had vanished without a word, leaving her to face London society alone, armed with nothing but her dwindling courage and the painful absence of an explanation. "The final touches, miss," her maid murmured, arranging Amelia's chestnut curls beneath a modest bonnet. "Though if I may be so bold, perhaps remaining home today might be wiser." Amelia's reflection stared back at her from the looking-glass, her complexion paler than usual, dark circles shadowing her hazel eyes. "I cannot hide forever, Martha. The longer I remain sequestered, the more vindication I give to the gossips." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval, but she offered no further counsel. A lady abandoned by her fiancé had few paths forward in society, none of them promising. At 26, with no substantial dowry and a family name more respectable than remarkable, Amelia had been fortunate to secure Edmund's affections. His sudden desertion left her not only heartbroken, but precariously positioned on the precipice of social irrelevance. "Very well, miss," Martha conceded, handing Amelia her gloves. "But perhaps a short outing to the booksellers and back." "Yes, precisely my intention," Amelia replied, though both women recognized the falsehood. The truth was that she had received an invitation, perhaps born of pity, perhaps curiosity, to take tea with Lady Harrington, whose salon remained influential enough that Amelia dared not refuse. Departing her modest townhouse on the less fashionable fringes of Mayfair, Amelia steeled herself against the scrutiny she would undoubtedly face. The terrace houses stood shoulder to shoulder like gossiping matrons, their windows gleaming eyes watching her passage. She clasped her reticule tightly, the morning edition of the Gazette concealed within its confines. She hadn't needed to read beyond the society page's 3rd paragraph to find her humiliation chronicled for all of London to dissect over their morning toast. The sudden departure of Mr. E.L. for the continent has left certain expectations unfulfilled, and a particular young lady in a most unfortunate position. One wonders if financial considerations have rendered matrimonial intentions untenable, or if other, more scandalous motivations might be at play. The carriage jostled over cobblestones, and Amelia forced herself to breathe evenly. Love was for the fortunate, the wealthy, the titled, not for women like her who had neither extraordinary beauty nor substantial connections. She had allowed herself to believe otherwise, and now she paid the price for such foolishness. Lady Harrington's drawing-room buzzed with precisely the sort of well-bred conversation that concealed barbed observations beneath layers of politeness. Amelia's entrance caused a momentary lull, followed by a swell of too bright greetings. "Miss Kensington, how delightful," Lady Harrington said, her voice warm while her eyes conducted a thorough assessment. "We had feared you might be indisposed." "Not at all, Lady Harrington. I'm grateful for your kind invitation," Amelia replied, the practiced words flowing easily while she scanned the room. Relief washed through her when she recognized no one from Edmund's immediate circle. "Do come meet the Duke of Grantham. He has only recently returned from his estate in Northumberland and knows, shockingly little, of our London diversions." Before Amelia could formulate a polite refusal, she found herself being guided toward a tall figure standing somewhat apart from the chattering groups. The Duke of Grantham, Gabriel Ashworth, was not unknown to London society, though his appearances were infrequent enough to maintain an air of mystery about him. Stories of his brooding temperament and the scandal that had followed his brief, tragic marriage years ago still circulated in hushed tones. "Your Grace, may I present Miss Amelia Kensington?" The Duke turned, and Amelia found herself gazing up into eyes the colour of a winter sea, grey-blue and startlingly penetrating. His features were aristocratic, his jawline sharply defined beneath a complexion that suggested he spent more time outdoors than most gentlemen of his station. He was not conventionally handsome, perhaps, but there was a compelling quality to his countenance that made it difficult to look away. "Miss Kensington." His voice was deep, his bow correct if somewhat perfunctory. "Your Grace," she replied, executing a perfect curtsy despite her nerves. Lady Harrington, seemingly satisfied with this minimal exchange, was promptly distracted by another arrival, leaving Amelia awkwardly positioned before the Duke, who regarded her with an unsettling intensity. "I confess, Miss Kensington, I find these gatherings rather tedious," he said after a moment of silence. "I wonder if you share that sentiment, or if you are among those who thrive on social obligations." The unexpected frankness of his question caught Amelia off guard. "I find there is value in maintaining connections, Your Grace, though I would not claim to thrive on them as you suggest." A flicker of something interest, perhaps, crossed his face. A diplomatic answer. "I would expect nothing less in Lady Harrington's drawing-room." His gaze shifted briefly to where their hostess held court, "though I wonder what answer you might give were we conversing elsewhere." "I suspect, Your Grace, that we are unlikely to converse elsewhere," making the question rather academic, Amelia responded, surprising herself with her boldness. Instead of taking offense, the Duke's mouth curved slightly. "Indeed. Though it is precisely such academic questions that I find most intriguing at gatherings where substantive conversation is so rarely on offer." Before Amelia could respond, Lady Forsyth, a notorious gossip, approached with obvious intent. "Miss Kensington, what a pleasant surprise to see you in society. We had heard. Well, rumors suggest you might be in mourning for certain expectations." Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. "I find, Lady Forsyth, that expectations are rather like the weather, subject to change without sufficient warning and best addressed with practical adaptation rather than excessive lamentation." Lady Forsyth's eyes widened slightly at this response, while beside her, the Duke made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "How philosophical of you, my dear," Lady Forsyth replied, her smile sharpening. "Though I wonder if Mr. Lockwood shares your equanimity regarding broken engagements. His hasty departure for Vienna has tongues wagging about potential entanglements of a financial nature." "I could not presume to speak to Mr. Lockwood's frame of mind," Amelia said evenly, though her heart constricted at this confirmation of Edmund's destination. "As to his finances, such matters remain his private concern." "Your loyalty is commendable, if perhaps misplaced," Lady Forsyth pressed. "Particularly as it seems he left considerable debts behind. Debts that some suggest motivated his interest in a certain merchant's daughter, recently arrived from Liverpool, with a dowry substantial enough to resurrect even the most desperate of gentlemen." The blow landed with brutal precision. Amelia had suspected something of the sort, but having it confirmed so publicly, and with such evident relish, sent a wave of humiliation washing through her. She opened her mouth, uncertain what defense she might mount, when the Duke unexpectedly intervened. "Lady Forsyth, your attention to the financial circumstances of others suggests an uncommon interest in commerce. Perhaps you might consider redirecting such energies toward the management of Lord Forsyth's tenant farms, which I understand have fallen into rather shocking disrepair." Lady Forsyth blanched, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly before she recovered her composure. "Your Grace, I merely expressed concern for Miss Kensington's welfare, naturally," the Duke finished smoothly. "A sentiment we all share, though perhaps with varying degrees of tact." Effectively dismissed, Lady Forsyth retreated, leaving Amelia momentarily speechless at the Duke's unexpected intervention. "Thank you, Your Grace," she finally managed, her voice lower than she intended, "though I fear your gallantry may have cost you Lady Forsyth's goodwill." "A price I pay with considerable satisfaction," he replied, his expression unreadable. "I have little patience for those who derive pleasure from others' misfortunes." A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable, but charged with an awareness that extended beyond the usual constraints of a social introduction. Amelia found herself studying his face more closely, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight downward turn of his mouth that suggested habitual solemnity rather than present displeasure. "I should take my leave," she said at last, feeling suddenly weary of maintaining her facade of indifference. "I've fulfilled my social obligation and proven myself neither collapsed with heartbreak nor fled to a convent." The Duke surprised her with another of his rare, brief smiles. Is that the standard by which successful appearances are measured? I find myself woefully uninformed about current social metrics. For abandoned fiancés, Your Grace, the bar for success is remarkably low, Amelia replied, unable to keep the bitterness entirely from her tone. Simply appearing in public without visible tears is considered a triumph of character. Something in his expression shifted, and Amelia immediately regretted her candor. She had already revealed far too much vulnerability to this near stranger, regardless of his momentary kindness. "Forgive me," she said quickly, "that was inappropriate." "On the contrary," he replied, "it was refreshingly honest, a quality I value far above propriety." He hesitated, then added, "Would you permit me to call upon you, Miss Kensington?" The question was so unexpected that Amelia could only stare at him. Your Grace, I fear you may have misunderstood." "I assure you I understand perfectly," he interrupted, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I am proposing a social call, nothing more. Perhaps you might show me your garden." "I have a particular interest in horticulture." "My garden is hardly worth your attention, sir," she said, bewildered by his persistence. "It consists of 3 rose bushes and an obstinate patch of lavender that refuses to thrive despite my best efforts." "Then I shall offer advice on coaxing reluctant lavender to prosperity," he replied, with what almost approached genuine warmth. "Tomorrow at 3, if convenient." Before Amelia could formulate a response that adequately conveyed the impropriety of his suggestion, a notorious widower duke calling upon a recently jilted woman of modest standing, he had bowed and moved away, leaving her to wonder if the brief exchange had been a peculiar dream brought on by emotional exhaustion. The answer came the following afternoon when, precisely at 3, the Duke's carriage arrived before her modest home, sending her household into unprecedented disarray and the neighbors' curtains twitching with undisguised interest. Martha bustled about, frantically arranging tea things while Amelia stood frozen by the window, watching as Gabriel Ashworth, the Duke of Grantham, descended from his carriage with fluid grace. Unlike many gentlemen of his rank, he wore his authority without ostentation, his clothing elegant but understated, his only concession to his status the heavy signet ring glinting on his right hand. "Miss, you must sit down," Martha urged. "No gentleman wants to see a lady hovering by the window awaiting his arrival." "He is hardly a gentleman calling with romantic intentions," Amelia replied, though she obediently moved to the settee. "This visit is likely born of pity, or perhaps curiosity about the latest unfortunate to grace the gossip columns." Martha's expression suggested she had her own theories about the Duke's motivations, but she merely adjusted a cushion and retreated as the butler announced his grace. The Duke seemed to fill the modest drawing room, though he carried himself with careful restraint, as if conscious of the space he occupied. Up close, without the buffer of Lady Harrington's crowded salon, Amelia noticed details she had missed before, a small scar at his temple, partially concealed by dark hair. The slight asymmetry of features that somehow enhanced rather than diminished his appeal. The way his gaze assessed her home with interest rather than the condescension she had expected. "Miss Kensington," he greeted her, his bow as precise as it had been the previous day. "Thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace," she replied, gesturing to a chair, "I confess your visit is unexpected." "Yet you prepared tea," he observed, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "My housekeeper believes in preparedness, particularly when faced with the unprecedented," Amelia replied, pouring tea with hands she willed to remain steady. "I don't imagine you often call upon unmarried ladies of little consequence." "I call upon those I find interesting, regardless of circumstance," he said simply, accepting the cup she offered. "A privilege of my position that I exercise infrequently, but with conviction." Amelia studied him over the rim of her teacup. "And you find me interesting, Your Grace?" "A woman whose claim to notoriety rests entirely upon being abandoned at the altar." "You were not abandoned at the altar," he corrected mildly. "From what I understand, the wedding was still some weeks distant when Mr. Lockwood demonstrated his remarkable lack of judgment." The distinction offers limited comfort, Amelia said dryly. Perhaps not, he conceded, but accuracy matters, particularly when one's reputation is at stake. He paused, his expression becoming more serious. Which brings me to my purpose in calling on you today. Amelia tensed involuntarily. I was under the impression you had come to advise me about lavender. That too, if you wish, he replied, the gravity in his eyes belying his light tone. But primarily, I came to warn you. Warn me? Amelia set down her cup, alarm spreading through her. Whatever do you mean? The Duke leaned forward slightly, his posture conveying urgency without intimidation. Mr. Lockwood's financial situation is more precarious than is generally known. Before leaving for Vienna, he engaged in certain transactions that have drawn attention from those who regulate such matters. There is talk of impropriety beyond simple debt, accusations of fraud and misrepresentation that, should they be proven, could reflect poorly on those closely associated with him. Amelia felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her. I was not privy to Edmund's financial dealings. Few fiancés would be, the Duke assured her. However, perception often matters more than reality in such cases. There are those who might question how much you knew or even suggest complicity. That's absurd, Amelia protested, genuine indignation flaring within her. I knew nothing of Edmund's affairs beyond what any betrothed might know. I believe you, he said, with a certainty that momentarily silenced her objections. But my belief carries limited influence in certain circles. You should prepare yourself for increased scrutiny and perhaps outright suspicion. Amelia rose from her seat, needing the comfort of movement. Why are you telling me this? We are barely acquainted. The Duke remained seated, his gaze following her as she paced. I have some experience with being the subject of unwarranted speculation and rumor. It is not an experience I would wish upon anyone, particularly someone already contending with public disappointment. Something in his tone, a subtle undercurrent of old pain, made Amelia pause. Everyone in London knew the broad strokes of the Duke's scandalous past. His young wife's death under mysterious circumstances, the whispers of his culpability, his subsequent withdrawal from society. But the man before her seemed more wounded than wicked, more cautious than calculating. What would you have me do with this warning? She asked, returning to her seat. I cannot leave London. I have nowhere else to go. My parents are deceased, and my relations in the country could hardly accommodate me indefinitely. I would not presume to dictate your course of action, he replied. But knowledge, even unwelcome knowledge, offers some protection against being blindsided by malicious gossip. Amelia studied him, searching for ulterior motives in his unexpected concern. Finding none she could immediately identify, she opted for candor. Your warning is appreciated, if disconcerting. Though I confess, I cannot fathom why the Duke of Grantham would trouble himself with the potential difficulties facing someone of my unremarkable standing. The Duke set aside his teacup and met her gaze directly. Perhaps I recognize something in you that resonates with my own experience, the dignity with which you face undeserved censure. Or perhaps I simply find it unconscionable that a woman of obvious intelligence and character should suffer for a man's dishonorable actions. His words, spoken without dramatic emphasis, yet with unmistakable sincerity, caused something to shift in Amelia's carefully guarded heart. Not trust, precisely. She had learned the cost of misplaced trust too recently, but a reluctant acknowledgement that perhaps not every gesture was motivated by self-interest or malice. Thank you for your candor, Your Grace, she said finally. I shall consider how best to navigate the challenges ahead. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. Now, shall we examine this stubborn lavender? I find that sometimes what appears to be resistance is merely a need for different circumstances to flourish. The unexpected pivot in conversation surprised a genuine laugh from Amelia. Very well, though I warn you, its stubbornness rivals that of the most obdurate peer of the realm. A worthy opponent, then, he replied, rising to his feet with a grace that belied his imposing height. I look forward to the introduction. As they moved toward the small garden at the rear of the house, Amelia found herself wondering about the enigma that was Gabriel Ashworth. His reputation suggested a man consumed by darkness, yet she had glimpsed something else entirely, a thoughtfulness, a quiet compassion that contradicted the whispers that had followed him for years. Perhaps, she thought, they were both victims of narratives shaped by others, trapped in stories not entirely of their own making. The realization offered little practical comfort, yet as the Duke knelt beside her struggling lavender, offering observations about soil and sunlight with unexpected expertise, Amelia felt the first tentative stirrings of something she had thought forever lost to her. Not hope precisely, but possibility. In the weeks that followed, Gabriel Ashworth's warning proved prophetic. The morning editions began to carry increasingly pointed references to Edmund Lockwood's financial improprieties, with thinly veiled insinuations about those who might have benefited from or enabled his schemes. Though Amelia was never named directly, the references to certain recently broken engagements left little doubt about the target of these speculations. Invitations dwindled, then ceased altogether. Former acquaintances crossed streets to avoid encounters. Even merchants with whom she had dealt for years began to regard her with wary eyes, as if financial ruin might be contagious. Through it all, the Duke remained a steady if unexpected presence. His visits, initially confined to her small garden, gradually expanded to include walks in less frequented parks, and most surprisingly, invitations to his own home, properly chaperoned, of course, where his extensive library offered refuge from the increasingly hostile world beyond. It was during one such visit, as autumn yielded to winter's first chill, that Amelia found herself seated before the fire in the Duke's study, a rare first edition of botanical illustrations open on her lap. "You seem preoccupied today," the Duke observed, looking up from his correspondence. "Has something occurred?" Amelia hesitated, reluctant to burden him further with her difficulties. Their friendship, for she had come to think of it as such, despite the disparity in their stations, already transgressed numerous social boundaries. That he continued to associate with her despite the damage to his own reputation spoke to a loyalty she had not expected to find again. "It is nothing of consequence," she began, then, meeting his skeptical gaze, amended her answer. "My landlord has informed me that he will not renew my lease when it expires next month. He expressed concerns about undesirable elements that might be attracted to the property." Gabriel set aside his pen, his expression darkening. "He refers to creditors pursuing Lockwood's debts, I presume." "Among other unsavory possibilities," Amelia confirmed, attempting a lightness she did not feel. "Apparently, a woman associated with financial scandal poses risks ranging from midnight raids by authorities to potential brothel operations." "That is absurd," Gabriel said flatly. "Your landlord's ignorance is matched only by his prejudice." "Perhaps," Amelia agreed, closing the book in her lap, "but his prejudice is widely shared. I've inquired at 3 other properties this week, only to be politely but firmly refused once my name was recognized." Gabriel rose, moving to stand before the fire. The flames cast his features in sharp relief, highlighting the tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "This situation has become untenable. Lockwood's actions have placed you in an impossible position, and society's response has been predictably cruel." "I have always known that a woman alone faces limited options," Amelia said, striving for practicality despite the fear that had become her constant companion. "Perhaps it is time to consider a position as a governess or lady's companion. My accomplishments are modest, but sufficient for such roles. And subject yourself to the whims and prejudices of employers who would view you as tainted by association." Gabriel turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically fierce. "No, there is another solution, though I had hoped to approach it differently." Amelia felt a flutter of apprehension. "What solution do you propose?" Gabriel moved toward her then, seemingly thinking better of it, retreated to a more proper distance. "Marriage," he said simply. "To me." The word hung in the air between them, startling in its directness. Amelia could only stare at him, certain she had misheard or misunderstood. "Your Grace," she began carefully, "if this is a jest, I confess I find little humor in it." "It is not a jest," he replied, his voice steady despite the intensity of his gaze. It is a proposal, albeit one made with less ceremony than you deserve. Amelia rose slowly, needing to establish some equilibrium in a conversation that had veered so unexpectedly from its expected course. Your Grace, Gabriel, you cannot possibly be serious. You are a duke. I am a woman of no particular distinction, currently embroiled in scandal not of my making. Society would never countenance such a match. Society, Gabriel said with undisguised contempt, has already judged and condemned us both on the basis of appearances rather than truth. Why should their opinion matter in this? Because you have a position to maintain, responsibilities to your title and estate, Amelia countered, her practical nature reasserting itself despite her shock. A duchess should bring connections, fortune, or at minimum an unblemished reputation. I offer none of these advantages. Gabriel stepped closer, close enough that Amelia could see the flecks of darker blue in his grey eyes. You offer intelligence, compassion, and a strength of character I have rarely encountered. You face adversity with dignity rather than self-pity. You see me as a man, not merely a title or a collection of rumors. The sincerity in his voice struck at Amelia's carefully constructed defenses. Even if what you say is true, marriage is. Marriage should be more than a practical arrangement or an act of charity. Is that what you believe this would be, charity? Gabriel asked, a note of frustration entering his tone. Have I given you cause to think I view you as an object of pity? No, Amelia admitted, but neither have you given me reason to believe you harbor romantic feelings toward me. We have been friends, unexpected and valued friends, but nothing in our acquaintance has suggested deeper sentiments. Gabriel was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. Perhaps I have been overly cautious in expressing certain sentiments, given your recent experience with betrayal. Or perhaps I feared that any declaration of deeper feelings would be interpreted precisely as you suggest, as pity rather than genuine regard. He moved to the window, gazing out at the winter garden beyond. I am not a man given to poetic declarations or impulsive gestures, Amelia. My first marriage taught me the danger of confusing passion with love, of mistaking temporary infatuation for lasting affection. Turning back to her, he continued, what I feel for you has grown gradually, built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation of your character. I admire your resilience, your honesty, your capacity for joy despite circumstances that would embitter many. I find myself thinking of you when we are apart, anticipating our conversations, valuing your perspective on matters both significant and trivial. His words, spoken with quiet certainty, caused Amelia's heart to beat faster. Why have you said nothing of this before? Because I wish to give you time, he replied simply. Time to heal from Lockwood's betrayal, time to know me as I truly am rather than as rumor has painted me. I had intended to court you properly, when enough time had passed that my intentions would not be misconstrued. And now, Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now circumstances force my hand sooner than I would have chosen, Gabriel acknowledged. But the sentiment behind my proposal remains genuine. I wish to marry you, Amelia Kensington, not out of pity or practicality, but because I believe we could build a life of mutual respect and companionship. Perhaps even love in time. The qualification, in time, revealed a vulnerability that touched Amelia deeply. Gabriel was not pretending to a grand passion, nor promising what he could not guarantee. Instead, he offered honesty, respect, and the possibility of something deeper developing between them. I need time to consider, she said at last, her practical nature asserting itself despite the emotional tumult his words had caused. This is unexpected, to say the least. Gabriel nodded, accepting her hesitation without apparent offense. Of course, though I should note that your lease expires in 3 weeks, and securing alternative accommodation will become no easier in the interim. Are you attempting to pressure me into acceptance? Amelia asked, a hint of indignation coloring her tone. I am acknowledging practical realities, he corrected gently. I would wait years for your answer were circumstances different, As they stand, certain decisions must be made sooner rather than later. Before Amelia could formulate a response, the door to the study opened to admit Gabriel's butler, his typically impassive expression disrupted by obvious concern. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but there is a matter requiring immediate attention. A gentleman has arrived with documents he claims are of an urgent legal nature concerning Miss Kensington." Amelia felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "What gentleman? What documents?" The butler hesitated, looking to his employer for guidance. "Speak freely, Harrison," Gabriel instructed. "Miss Kensington has a right to know what concerns her." "A Mr. Simmons, representing the firm of Hargrove and Sons, solicitors," Harrison replied. "He carries what appear to be legal notices regarding debts incurred by Mr. Edmund Lockwood, for which he claims Miss Kensington bears joint responsibility." "That's absurd," Amelia protested, fear giving way to indignation. "I signed no documents accepting responsibility for Edmund's debts." "Perhaps not knowingly," Gabriel said grimly, "but Lockwood strikes me as a man who would not hesitate to forge signatures if it served his purpose." To Harrison, he added, "Show Mr. Simmons to the blue drawing-room. I will attend him shortly." As the butler withdrew, Gabriel turned to Amelia, his expression grave. "This complicates matters considerably. If Lockwood has indeed implicated you in his financial improprieties, the consequences could extend beyond social ostracism to legal jeopardy." "I sign nothing," Amelia repeated, though a horrible suspicion was beginning to form. "At least, nothing regarding loans or investments. There were some documents related to the wedding arrangements, details about the settlement, which Lockwood might have used as opportunities to obtain your signature on other papers," Gabriel finished, his tone hardening. "A common tactic among those who engage in such fraud." Amelia sank back into her chair, the full implications of her situation becoming horribly clear. "If what you suspect is true, I could face not only financial ruin, but potential criminal charges." "Yes," Gabriel confirmed, not softening the truth. "Though as your husband, I could challenge such claims far more effectively than you could alone. My solicitors are among the finest in London, and my resources considerably exceed those of Lockwood's creditors." The practical advantages of his proposal, which had seemed secondary moments before, now took on new significance. Marriage to Gabriel would offer not just social protection, but legal sanctuary as well. Yet the thought of accepting him under such circumstances, of potentially binding him to her troubles, filled her with a different kind of dread. "I cannot allow you to entangle yourself in my difficulties," she said firmly. "Your reputation has only recently begun to recover from past scandals. Associating yourself with me now, particularly if these allegations gain traction, would undo all that progress." Gabriel moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his, a breach of propriety that, under the circumstances, seemed trivial. "Amelia, listen to me. My concern is not for my reputation, but for your well-being. The allegations against you are false, but fighting them alone would be nearly impossible. As Duchess of Grantham, you would have the protection of my name, my resources, and my unwavering support. And you would have a wife tainted by scandal and potential legal proceedings," Amelia countered. "How could that possibly be what you want?" Gabriel's grip on her hands tightened slightly. "What I want is you, whatever circumstances accompany that choice. I have lived through scandal before, I can weather it again. What I cannot bear is the thought of you facing these challenges alone when I have the means to help you." The sincerity in his voice, the steady certainty in his gaze, broke through Amelia's remaining defenses. "You truly mean it," she said softly, wonder replacing doubt. "This isn't merely about protection or practicality for you." "No," he confirmed, his voice equally soft, "though I cannot deny those considerations exist. My primary motivation remains what I expressed earlier, genuine regard and the desire for a partnership based on mutual respect and affection." Amelia studied his face, seeking any sign of reservation or regret. Finding none, she took a deep breath, making her decision with clear-eyed awareness of both its advantages and its potential costs. Then yes, Gabriel Ashworth, I will marry you. The relief that washed over his features was so evident that Amelia felt a corresponding lightness in her own heart. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would not face them alone. We should proceed quickly, Gabriel said, rising to his feet with renewed purpose. A special license can be obtained within days. In the meantime, I suggest you remove to my sister's home in Richmond. Lady Alina will welcome you, and her residence is far enough from London to avoid immediate scrutiny. The practicality of his approach, free from excessive sentiment or dramatic gestures, reassured Amelia that this decision, however hastily made, was not without careful consideration. And the gentleman, waiting with his legal notices. Leave him to me, Gabriel said, his tone hardening. By the time my solicitors finish with him, he will wish he had never heard the name Lockwood, much less pursued his spurious claims against you. The fierce protectiveness in his voice stirred something warm and unfamiliar in Amelia's chest. Not the giddy infatuation she had once felt for Edmund, but something steadier, more substantial. Trust, perhaps, or the first tentative roots of the deeper affection Gabriel had spoken of growing between them. Very well, she agreed, rising to her feet, though I insist on being present when you speak with this Mr. Simmons. If I am to face allegations, I should know their exact nature. Gabriel looked as though he might object, then nodded. Your courage continues to impress me, Amelia Kensington. Soon to be Amelia Ashworth, Duchess of Grantham. The title, spoken aloud, sent a shiver of both apprehension and anticipation through Amelia. A transformation I could never have imagined, she admitted. And one I fear society will find difficult to accept. Society, Gabriel said with a dismissive gesture, will adjust its perceptions accordingly, as it always does when confronted with power and privilege. More importantly, those whose opinions truly matter will recognize the wisdom of my choice. His confidence bolstered Amelia's own resolve. Whatever came next, confrontations with creditors, whispers about her rapid elevation, the inevitable scrutiny that would accompany her new position, she would face it with the dignity Gabriel had admired in her and the strength his support had helped her rediscover within herself. 3 days later, in the private chapel of Gabriel's London residence, with only his sister Lady Alina and her husband as witnesses, Amelia Kensington became the Duchess of Grantham. The ceremony was brief, the celebratory meal that followed intimate rather than lavish. The entire proceedings conducted with a quiet dignity that belied the urgency of their circumstances. As Gabriel led her through the corridors of what was now her home, Amelia felt a curious blend of unreality and absolute certainty. The decision that had seemed so impulsive, so potentially reckless, now felt like the most natural course imaginable. "Are you disappointed?" Gabriel asked as they reached the door to her new apartments, rooms that had been hastily prepared for her arrival. Many women dream of elaborate weddings, with hundreds of guests and celebrations lasting days. Amelia considered his question seriously before answering. "I find I prefer this, something genuine and private, without pretense or excessive display. Though I confess I am somewhat overwhelmed by the rapidity of the change in my circumstances." Gabriel's expression softened. "We will proceed at whatever pace you require, Amelia, in all things." The gentle reassurance in his words, the careful respect with which he had treated her throughout their acquaintance, confirmed for Amelia that while their marriage had begun under unusual circumstances, it had the potential to become something far more meaningful than the conventional unions she had once envied. "Thank you," she said simply, reaching to touch his face with tentative fingers, "for seeing something in me worth protecting, worth valuing." Gabriel caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I see you clearly, Amelia, perhaps more clearly than you see yourself." In that moment, looking into his eyes, Amelia allowed herself to believe that perhaps her earlier certainty, that love was only for the fortunate, the wealthy, the untarnished, had been wrong. Perhaps love could also be for those who had known disappointment, who carried scars, who had learned through painful experience the difference between infatuation and genuine regard. Perhaps love could even be for her. Spring arrived in London with its customary capriciousness, brilliant sunshine giving way to sudden showers, warm breezes yielding to lingering winter chills. In the month since her marriage, Amelia had undergone a transformation almost as dramatic as the seasonal shift from barren winter to burgeoning life. The legal entanglements Edmund had left in his wake had proven complex but not insurmountable. Gabriel's solicitors had systematically dismantled the fraudulent claims against Amelia while simultaneously pursuing Edmund himself through diplomatic channels. Reports suggested he had fled Vienna for parts unknown, his scheme to marry the Liverpool heiress having collapsed when news of his previous engagement and financial improprieties reached her family. Society's reaction to Amelia's sudden elevation had followed the pattern Gabriel had predicted. Initial shock giving way to grudging acceptance as the power and influence of the Grantham title asserted itself. Invitations that had abruptly ceased now arrived with flattering regularity, though Amelia accepted only those that genuinely interested her rather than seeking validation through social appearances. More significant than external changes, however, were the internal shifts in Amelia's understanding of herself and her marriage. The partnership Gabriel had proposed, founded on mutual respect and the potential for deeper affection, had evolved into something neither of them had fully anticipated. "You've transformed this garden entirely," Gabriel observed as they walked together through the grounds of his country estate, where they had retreated as London prepared for the height of the season. "Harrison tells me you spend hours here each day." "Not quite hours," Amelia corrected, smiling up at him, "though I find the work satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. There's something deeply gratifying about nurturing growth, about helping things flourish in soil where they once struggled." Gabriel's answering smile held warmth and a hint of something deeper, more profound. A philosophy that extends beyond gardening, perhaps. "Perhaps," Amelia agreed, understanding his meaning. Their relationship had indeed flourished, developing from cautious respect to genuine affection to something that, while neither of them had yet named it aloud, increasingly resembled love. They had learned each other's habits, preferences, the small details that comprised a life shared. Gabriel's tendency towards solitude balanced by Amelia's more sociable nature. Her practical approach to challenges complementing his strategic thinking, his occasional melancholy brightened by her resilient optimism. Physical intimacy, approached initially with Gabriel's characteristic restraint and consideration, had evolved into a profound connection that sometimes still left Amelia breathless with wonder. The passion she had once believed herself incapable of feeling had awakened under his patient, reverent attention, revealing yet another dimension of their increasingly complex bond. "I've had a letter from Elena," Gabriel said as they paused beside a newly planted rose garden. "She and Charles intend to visit next week, if that meets with your approval." "Of course," Amelia replied, genuinely pleased at the prospect. Gabriel's sister had become a valued friend and ally, her acceptance of Amelia as her brother's wife immediate and without reservation. "I should like to show her the improvements to the East Wing nursery." Gabriel's expression flickered with something Amelia couldn't quite identify, surprise, perhaps, or a fleeting uncertainty. "The nursery. I wasn't aware you had taken an interest in that part of the house." Amelia felt a sudden nervousness, realizing she had ventured into territory they had not yet directly discussed. "I thought, that is, I hoped it might be needed." "Eventually." Understanding dawned in Gabriel's eyes, followed by a cautious hope that made Amelia's heart constrict with tenderness. "Are you suggesting what I think you are?" "Not yet," she clarified quickly, "but perhaps, soon. If that is something you would welcome." Gabriel's response was to draw her close, public propriety temporarily forgotten as he pressed his forehead to hers. "There is nothing I would welcome more than a child born of our union," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A family of our own making, free from the shadows of the past." The shadows he referred to were familiar to Amelia now. The tragic circumstances of his first marriage, the loss of a child never born, the grief and guilt that had haunted him for years afterward. That he could envision a future beyond that pain, a family created with her, felt like a gift beyond measure. "Then we shall prepare," she said softly, "for possibilities and hopes yet to be realized." Gabriel kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that conveyed more than passionate embraces ever could, promise, partnership, the quiet certainty of belonging. As they continued their walk, arms linked and steps matched, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The humiliation of Edmund's abandonment, once a wound that had seemed unbearable, now appeared as little more than a necessary step on the path that had led her to Gabriel. The scandal that had threatened to define her had instead offered an unexpected liberation from society's narrow expectations, from her own limited understanding of what love could be. "You're smiling," Gabriel observed, glancing down at her with curious affection. "What thoughts bring such contentment?" Amelia considered how to express the complexity of her reflections, then opted for the simple truth. "I was thinking that sometimes what appears to be our greatest misfortune can lead us to our greatest blessing. That perhaps being left alone was the best thing that could have happened to me because it led me to you." Gabriel's step faltered slightly, his expression opening with rare vulnerability. "And I was thinking how remarkable it is that in seeking to offer you redemption from scandal, I found my own redemption from guilt and isolation." The reciprocity of their journey, each healing the other, each finding in the other what they had not known they needed, struck Amelia with its perfect symmetry. What had begun as an arrangement of mutual benefit had transformed into a union of mutual salvation, a love born not of romantic illusion, but of genuine understanding and acceptance. "Shall we return to the house?" Gabriel asked as clouds gathered on the horizon, promising one of spring's sudden showers, "or risk the rain for a while longer?" Amelia looked up at the darkening sky, then back at her husband's face, dear now in ways she could never have anticipated when they first met in Lady Harrington's drawing room. "Let's stay out a bit longer," she decided. "I find I've developed quite an appreciation for unexpected weather and all the surprising beauty it can bring." Gabriel's answering smile held all the warmth of summer sunshine, a promise of seasons yet to come, of years unfolding before them, years built on the foundation they had laid together, stone by careful stone, day by reverent day. "As you wish, my Duchess," he said, drawing her closer as the first drops began to fall. "As you wish."